the winter of 1944, snow fell over the forests of Belgium so quietly that it felt unreal, as if the war itself had paused to listen. The trees stood frozen, their branches heavy with white, hiding men who no longer felt the cold because fear had burned it out of them. Private Thomas Miller lay flat in a shallow foxhole, his breath rising in small clouds. He was 21 years old, from small town in Pennsylvania, and before the war, the cold had only meant early mornings and frozen fields. Now it meant stiff fingers, slow reactions, and death that came without warning. Somewhere ahead, beyond the trees, German artillery waited. The radio crackled softly behind him, then went silent again. Silence was dangerous. Too much silence meant something was moving. Thomas tightened his grip on his rifle and thought of home. He thought of his younger sister, who used to wave from the porch every morning as he walked to school. He wondered if she still waved at nothing now. The first shell landed without sound. Then the ground exploded. Earth, snow, and splintered wood flew through the air as the forest screamed. Another shell followed, then another. The quiet winter morning shattered into chaos. "Incoming!" someone yelled, though everyone already knew. Thomas pressed his face into the mud as the world shook. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Men shouted names that no one answered. This was the Ardennes. This was the German counteroffensive. This was what history would later call the Battle of the Bulge. At the time, it felt like the end of the world. When the shelling stopped, it stopped suddenly, as if someone had turned off the sky. Smoke drifted between the trees, thick and bitter. Snow melted into dark patches where men had fallen. Thomas lifted his head slowly. His ears rang. His heart hammered so hard it hurt. Then he heard footsteps. Not American. German infantry moved through the trees with discipline and purpose, gray coats blending into the winter shadows. They were close, too close. Thomas raised his rifle and fired. The recoil slammed into his shoulder. A German soldier dropped, disappearing into the snow. The forest erupted into gunfire. Bullets tore through branches, snapped past heads, buried themselves in frozen earth. Men fell, screamed, crawled. Orders were shouted, lost, shouted again. Thomas reloaded with shaking hands, firing again and again, not aiming at faces, but at movement, at shadows. War reduced everything to instinct. At one point, a German soldier appeared just feet away, young, terrified, no different from Thomas himself. They stared at each other for a fraction of a second that felt longer than the war. Thomas pulled the trigger. The soldier collapsed. Thomas did not look away this time. He could not. He saw the snow beneath the man turn red, saw the life leave his eyes. Something inside Thomas broke quietly. By nightfall, the Americans were surrounded. No food, no reinforcements, no clear way out. The cold grew worse. Men huddled together, sharing body heat, sharing cigarettes, sharing fear. Some prayed, some cursed, some stared into the darkness, waiting for footsteps that might never come or might come too soon. Captain Reynolds gathered what remained of the company and spoke softly. "We hold. That's all there is to it." Thomas wondered how long a man could hold before there was nothing left to hold with. The days blurred together. German loudspeakers called out in English, promising warm food and safe surrender. Some men laughed weakly, some listened too closely. Wounded soldiers froze where they lay because there were no medics left to reach them. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, hope. Thomas stopped feeling his feet. He stopped feeling many things. On the fifth night, snow fell again. Thomas sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, eyes half closed. He might fall asleep and not wake up. Part of him welcomed that thought. Then, faint as first, he heard it. Engines. American engines.
The sound grew louder, stronger, undeniable. Tanks, artillery, relief. Men began to cry openly. Some laughed, some simply closed their eyes. The siege broke at dawn. American forces pushed through the German lines with overwhelming force. The forest that had been a grave became a battlefield again, then finally fell silent. Thomas survived. Many did not. Months later, when the war ended, Thomas returned home to Pennsylvania. People called him a hero. They shook his hand. They thanked him for his service. He smiled when he was supposed to. At night, he dreamed of snow turning red. Years passed. Life moved on. But every winter, when the first snow fell, Thomas would stop whatever he was doing and listen. For engines, for footsteps, for voices calling from the trees. History would say the Battle of the Bulge was a turning point. Thomas knew the truth. It was not a turning point. It was a test of how much a human being could endure and still remain human. And some things, once endured, never truly end.
Thomas thought the war was over when he came home, but the war did not think the same. The train that carried him back rattled through quiet towns and open fields, places untouched by shell fire. People smiled at the soldiers through the windows. Some waved flags, some cried. Thomas sat still, his hands folded, watching the landscape pass like something borrowed from another life. Every sudden noise made his shoulders tense. Every whistle sounded too much like incoming fire. When he stepped onto the platform in his hometown, his mother was there. She ran to him and held him tightly, as if afraid he might vanish. Thomas stood stiff at first, then slowly returned the embrace. Her coat smelled of soap and home. It should have comforted him. Instead, it made his throat tighten. That night, he slept in his old bed. The ceiling looked the same. The walls were the same color. But the room felt too quiet, too exposed. He woke before dawn, heart racing, certain he had heard artillery. It was only the wind. Days turned into weeks. Thomas tried to work at the mill, but the noise of the machines made his hands shake. He dropped tools. He snapped at people without meaning to. At lunch, when someone dropped a metal tray, Thomas flinched so hard he fell from his chair. The laughter that followed was not cruel, just confused, but it burned him anyway. He stopped going out. Winter came again. The first snowfall arrived silently, just like it had in Belgium. Thomas stood at the window and watched the flakes drift down. His breath slowed. His chest felt tight. The snow was clean and bright and harmless, but his mind filled it with blood. That night, the dreams returned. He was back in the forest. The trees were bare. The ground was frozen. He could hear engines in the distance, but they never arrived. The German soldier stepped out from behind a tree again, young and afraid, exactly as before. This time, the soldier spoke. "Why did you live?" he asked. Thomas woke screaming. Years passed, but the dreams stayed. Thomas married. He had children. He laughed when he was supposed to, smiled for photographs, went to church on Sundays. People said he was lucky. People said he was strong. They did not see him sitting alone in the dark after everyone slept, staring at nothing, listening for sounds that no longer existed. One winter evening, his son asked him, "Dad, what was the war like?" Thomas opened his mouth and then closed it again. How could he explain cold that entered your bones and never left? How could he explain fear that trained your heart to beat too fast forever? "It was loud," he finally said. His son nodded, satisfied, and ran off. Thomas sat there long after. Decades later, when his hair had turned gray and his hands trembled for reasons unrelated to fear, a letter arrived. It was an invitation to a memorial in Belgium, near the forest where his unit had fought. Veterans were invited, survivors. Thomas read the letter 3 times. His wife asked if he wanted to go.
He said no. That night, the dreams were worse than ever. 2 weeks later, he booked the ticket. The forest looked smaller than he remembered. The trees were taller, the paths clearer. A stone memorial stood where foxholes once filled with frozen men. Names were carved into its surface, rows and rows of them. Thomas ran his fingers over letters cut into stone. Some names he recognized, some he did not. Each one had breathed once. Each one had hoped to go home. Snow began to fall lightly. Thomas closed his eyes. For the first time, he did not hear artillery. He did not hear engines or screams. He heard only the wind moving through branches, the sound of time passing. "I remember you," he whispered, though no one stood beside him. When he returned home, the dreams changed. They did not stop, but they softened. The forest appeared, but the snow stayed white. The soldier did not speak. Thomas lived a long life after that, longer than many, longer than he thought he deserved. On the night he died, snow fell again, quiet and gentle. His breathing slowed, his hands relaxed. For the first time since 1944, the war let him go. And somewhere, in a forest far away, the trees stood silently, holding the memory of men who endured the cold, the fear, and each other, so that others would never have to. The snow kept falling.